You've probably heard these words before, and it's nothing new. Humans have gotten news as early as the 1690s with one of the first published newspapers in the United States. Then came the radio, a small box where you could actually hear the reporters giving you news. With more people craving information daily, different networks tried new things to get ahead of the game. One company, RCA, now known as NBC, was ready for this, and in 1936, they achieved the unthinkable. They used television to broadcast news. Around 1915, several radio stations started to operate in the U.S. Sadly, most of them were foreign and nearly all of them were used for transmitting Morse code. However, when the U.S. entered World War I, the United States federal government took over all these foreign stations and later gave them to General Electric, Washington House, the American Telephone and Telephone Company, and United Fruit. These companies needed a way to run this station, so in 1919, they made a company and called it the Radio Corporation of America. In the beginning of RCA, most of its stations still had to use Morse code. Many small companies tried their hand at radio, but instead of sending messages in Morse code, they made commercial broadcasting stations. Doing this got these amateur stations lots of listeners, and soon RCA's parent companies followed suit. One of these companies, Washington House, obtained a license from the U.S. government, and by 1920 they launched their own commercial broadcasting station and called it KDKA. By 1926, KDKA was so popular that it caused the company to make a whole chain of broadcasting networks. These stations were meant to spread over a wide geographical area of New York, and soon the company started to call itself the National Broadcasting Corporation. In 1929, RCA created a new division called RCA Victor after buying the Victor Talking Machine Company. With the help of this new department, RCA could start making their own radio receivers and recorders, which helped them become the largest electric manufacturers. As the Great Depression of the 1930s crippled many companies, RCA remained on top. The company became such a big moneymaker that the head of the company, David Sarnoff, decided it was time to move to new headquarters. They leased a huge skyscraper in New York called Rockefeller Center. They would eventually buy the building in 1996, where they remain to this day. RCA's major technological accomplishment would happen in the 1930s with the development of the electronic television system, or TV. This invention was very cost-effective, as it still used many of the same parts they would normally use in manufacturing a radio. Using this invention in 1936, they had finally accomplished what they have dreamed of, showing news with pictures. Here's what it looked like.
This is station W2XK, an experimental transmitter of the National Broadcasting Company. We are operating on a frequency of 52 megacycles by authority of the Federal Communications Commission. A test program follows.
This clip wasn't live or anything. In fact, most of it was just voiced over with radio hosts, but to most, it was amazing. This new way to get information broke the barriers of news. Now people didn't have to listen to long radio ads that barely worked. Soon, news would be available not just for people in New York, but for people around the world. Today, one of the best ways to get information is by watching television news. After spending a 3-year, millions of dollar research effort led by Vladimir Zworskin, the invention was ready to be shown at the 1939 World's Fair in New York and briefly sold to the public. At the fair, they managed to introduce people to the wonders of television news. Also in attendance of this fair was President Franklin D. Roosevelt to see all the wonderful inventions and give a speech. RCA knew about this speech, so they decided to broadcast it, which made Franklin D. Roosevelt the first president to appear on TV on April 30th, 1939. This broadcast was on television station W2XB2 on Channel 1.
America's World of Tomorrow is ready for its formal debut, the mighty exhibition which is a monument to imagination, showmanship and industry. To see the exhibits of 58 nations, crowds pour in from subways, trains, buses and cars, 500,000 strong. And for 40,000 invited guests, the moment has come. President Roosevelt, with his son John behind him on the right, speaks in the court of peace.
I hereby dedicate the World's Fair, the New York World's Fair of 1939, and I declare it open to all mankind.
The fair opens on the 150th anniversary of the inauguration of George Washington, and the father of his country looks out towards the British Pavilion, one of the outstanding exhibits.
This broadcast was seen by about 1,000 people because of its roughly 400-mile radius transmitted from the Empire State Building. The next day, on May 1st, NBC released 4 television models to the public in New York. Later, NBC tried something different. They started to bring cameras to professional football and basketball games. This established lots of firsts in the broadcasting community. The first network program happened January 12, 1940, when the play Meet the Wife was shot at W2XBS in Rockefeller Center and rebroadcasted by W2XB, W2XAF Live. Soon these broadcasts were able to be played in neighboring states such as Philadelphia. Television's experimental period ended when the FCC allowed full-fledged commercial television broadcasts. On July 1st, 1941, NBC station W2X2 in New York City received their first commercial license, changing their name to WNBT. The first official paid television advertisement broadcast by any U.S. station was for a watch manufacturer, Bulva. The next day, the start of a Brooklyn Dodgers baseball telecast aired on WNBT. Years later, in December 1953, NBC convinced the FCC to let them try to make the first colored television. FCC was hesitant at first because other companies had tried to do this, but all of them ended up as failures. But they gave in and allowed it. NBC began to transmit with a few shows in 1954 and broadcast the first program to air all episodes of the show called The Marriage in color beginning that summer. Soon TV news would be available to the masses all over America and the world. People now have a variety of channels to get information on almost anything they want. TV has also given humanity such great moments such as the Apollo 11 launch in 1969 and the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1991. This form of getting information has also given us some of the most tragic events, such as the assassination of President John F. Kennedy and the fall of the World Trade Center in New York. Let us never forget the reason this is possible, because of one company and their will to make an accomplishment that would change the world as we know it.